Hello and welcome back to the sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Open Series in Knoxville. I'm Nick Miller alongside John Aiken. How you doing?
Doing pretty good.
I would say you are. You
Yeah.
are 6 rounds into the Legacy Open and you're 6-0 with a new take on Merfolk.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. Going into the tournament, I tried to look at where I wanted to be in the metagame. With this particular build, usually Merfolk's the beatdown, but I kind of wanted to go a little bit extra beatdown. With that, I added Cozy Strixter, which has been super phenomenal. It's the ability for it basically just to, they crack 2 fetch lands. It's like it's as good as Delver. They crack more. It's, Tarmogoyf.
Yeah. And in a format where people are shuffling their deck as often as they are.
Oh yeah. Fetch lands, Ponder, Intuition. It's just no end to shuffling.
So you have your 1-drop. You got Curse Catcher and Cozy Strixer. Then you have your 2 suite with all your lords.
Yep.
Phantasmal Images, more lords or whatever you need at the time.
Yep.
You've got the 4 of True Name Nemesis, which is just
it's hands down
technically a Merfolk.
It's hands down the best card in the deck. It's it's the reason that you can beat the other fair decks.
Yes.
And it's unreal how good it is, especially when in Merfolk, when like a lot of times it comes down to racing, even if they have their own True Name, you're like, well, I've got 2 lords, so mine's going to be quicker.
Yes. And you have the card that has caught the eye of a few people, Sig River Cutthroat.
Yeah. What happened when I started putting the deck together, I ended up cutting Mara Regery. And with that, I maxed out on Phantasmal Images because I just wanted to have more 2-drops. That way I could, be more aggressive, have more turns on turn 4 where I'm like 2 guys, because being able to play 2 dudes in a single turn definitely, adds to the clock, adds to the racing power. One thing I find though is because there's no library manipulation, the biggest problem is trying to find a way to draw cards. And so like with that, I added Sig into the deck because it pairs up with True Name perfectly. They have to lose 3 life. True Name hits for 3.
It's draw a card.
It's pretty fantastic. That and Silvergill Adept, usually give me enough card draw to, get in the punches I need, and then have the counterspell or what have you, or the extra man land, whatever to get in that damage.
Now, of course, the funny thing this deck is missing is Aether Vial.
Yeah.
You've cut Aether Vial for Chalice of the Void?
Essentially, yes. Aether Vial actually ended up getting cut for lands and a Jit in the main. Chalice of the Void actually took the place of Days. A lot of lists normally run Days. What I found in the last 2 tournaments I played in Nashville and I got 30th, and then Atlanta I made top 64. In Nashville I played Days, and just so many times Days just didn't do enough.
Right.
Where people, they'll play around it, or they, against the decks that it's good against, it's good. Against the decks that it's bad against, it's the worst possible draw you can have. What I found in playing in Nashville is that so many decks that I needed to beat were beating me because they had cantrips, and they're just digging through their deck, finding that one of answer that beats my board. And so Chalice of the Void, I looked at a sideboard or a sideboard list from GP Paris.
Right.
I think it's Omar Renner. He had a deck tech on day 2 of GP Paris. He had 4 Chalice on the sideboard. And he's like, it just counters every 1-drop. The format is like 80% 1-drops.
Pretty good against the Delver decks. 90% 1-drops.
Yeah, fantastic against Delver. It's fantastic against Sneak and Show. I had a match earlier. I went Chalice on 0, Chalice on 1. And he ended up not being able to beat me because he couldn't play his Lotus Petal to get the second creature into play.
Yeah, you normally see Chalice in decks with like the soul lands that can just power it out instantly. Not an issue for you just playing it on turn 2? So
haven't really had any issues. Mostly no one sees it coming.
Right.
And then by then it's too late. And then another thing, putting Chalice on 1, which is where I've normally put it, being able to use Cavern of Souls to power out my 1-drop Merfolks, even past that, is pretty fantastic.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting interaction to be able to get through there. Of course, you have the full 4 Force of Will, fight the unfair decks.
Yeah, you basically have to in the format. It's so hard not to have 4 of that card.
Right. And then your man lands, Mutavaults, and Mishra's Factory.
Yeah, just being able to give you that extra reach when, you're like, well, I drew 4 lands, but I've got 2 Mutavaults, try to get my beats on. The one JIT in the main is because there's so many Stoneforge decks, with Death and Taxes, Esper, Deathblade, all of them. Just being able to say, well, I have a Stoneforge too. I'll go get my JIT.
Yep. So with a deck that's so strong against the fair decks, you have a sideboard that is pretty tuned toward beating the combo decks and the graveyard-based decks.
The sideboard. I have 3 cards that deal with the fair decks, if you will, and then everything else is for combo. I've got the Grafdigger's Cage, Tormod's Crypt, because of Reanimator, Dredge, any graveyard-based strategy. I have 2 Swan Songs, which sort of a nombo with Chalice of the Void, but it's really more, it's primarily for Sneak and Show, and it's less about, am I going to put myself out of being able to cast it, more being able to cut off their threats. Because if I can cut off one, that opens up the avenue to where basically my creature's just going to win the game. I do have 1 Negate, which ended up originally was a Swan Song, but because of me playing Chalice on 1 so often, I'm like, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt to have a counter spell that can get around it.
Not the only person I've deck teched today in Legacy with a Negate in their sideboard.
I mean, it's a hard counter. It's in this format, especially when hard counters are key. Because so many people, play around Daze, play around Spell Pierce, just being able to say no. And then I also have a Mindbreak Trap. Again, something that I can play with a Chalice on 1 against Storm that just says, we're not doing this. Yeah.
And what are the cards you're bringing in against the fair matchups?
Against the fair matchups, I bring in Echoing Truth and Dismember. And then depending on which fair deck it is, back to basics. You've got the Delver decks that all have basically no basics, the Shardless Bug, actually, earlier today I had a match against Esper Deathblade playing Alex Bertensini, and he tapped out to equip a Batterskull to a Stoneforge. I dropped it back to basics. He didn't get to play any more spells.
No more magic.
Yep.
All right. Well, you're 6-0 so far. Are there any tweaks you might want to make in going for the future here, or any sideboard slots, or anything that hasn't performed well enough for you?
Actually, and it's hard to say because, being 6-0, it's hard to say, but honestly, no, the deck's performed the way that I needed it to. Every card's been right where I needed to. Even, the one card we didn't talk about in the sideboard was the Hercule's Recall, which I bring that in against usually I bring that in against the fair decks to bounce Batterskull or sort of Fire and Ice. In addition, being able to play around in Snaring Bridge, because that's one of the only cards that can actually beat me. So, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for sitting down on the sideboard with me, John Aiken.
It's a pleasure.
6-0 with Merfolk. Not your usual Merfolk, though. Keep an eye out for him. I'm Nick Miller in the sideboard. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com for the rest of the Legacy action here.